Hi, today I'm gonna walk you through the project creating a title block. Let's go ahead and spin up AutoCAD. I have it open already. You can see that it remembered my config settings. Here it is. And what is a title block actually? All the work samples I showed you had a title block. At its simplest, it's just lines and text. Um, let's just do a quick image search for title block and see what kind of stuff we get. I say just lines and text, but lines and text is pretty much everything we do. Um, so here's one. It's got some open space, the real estate where your drawing will go, and then some things in the corner, revisions, notes, segmented areas for different parts of the drawing that will come into play. This one looks like it has some labels of the different areas. It's got grid lines, it's got a logo. This is quite nice. All of these that we find are going to look probably kind of technical. Um, they don't have to be technical in planning. It can be a little more relaxed. Let's see if this returns anything. Probably not. Um, But if you look at architects' title blocks, sometimes they're a lot less technical. These have a lot of space given over to revision dates and drawn by, approved by. This goes back to the 40s and 50s, where each piece of paper um, becomes a record of work. So we don't need to get into it that much. I think I'm going to do something that's just a little more casual. Notice on this one, we're seeing the beginning of a locator map. This is very architectural, where you'll have, also you would recognize it from cartography, where you'd have numbers running along one axis and letters on the other. So if you're having a conversation with someone about a drawing, and you need to specify an area, you could say, well, C area C4, C5, and they'll know what part of the drawing to look at. Very much taken from mapping. You see it on a lot of architects' technical title blocks. So I get some ideas from this, but I think what I'm really going to do is design my own title block, actually. And I've already done a quick sketch of what I want to do. And let me see if I can't find that. And it's going to be very simple, just some basic lines and text. And I just sketched this out um, by hand on a piece of grid paper. And that's all I'm really looking for. I'm looking for a border, which is very traditional. I'm going to have some segmented title block along the bottom. I'll have a space for notes, a space for the drawing title and date, and a UIC logo, college logo, and my own name. That's really all I need. I don't really need a revision block and all that like pseudo technical stuff that doesn't apply to what I'm doing. The first question one might ask is, how big do you want to make it? Well, how big are you going to be plotting? Ultimately, if you're working in CAD, you'll have title blocks at every page size. 11 by 17 is a good place to start. It's something that you can get printed up cheaply at any FedEx Kinko's. Most of my work tends to be either 11 by 17 at a small scale or 24 by 36 at a larger scale. A lot of times you got to go back and forth. 11 by 17, if you plot at 200%, gets you pretty close to 24 by 36. Just remember that the scale is not going to be correct when you start blowing something up 200%. Oh, that's something actually that I want to remember to add, is a north arrow and a scale. Our drawings are going to be to scale, and you always need to know which way north is. So I'm going to keep this in mind as a sample. And at its most basic, it's just a rectangle. So if I just grab the rectangle tool, I've gone ahead and made a rectangle, but obviously I've got to have a lot more control than that. Where is this rectangle in space? How big is it? When I start working precisely, I need to know these things. So you can see that I've got 11 by 17 page sketched out, but I've got some white space margin before I hit my actual title block. I don't know, for 11 by 17, maybe a 1/4 inch. This isn't really to scale. This is just an idea. 1/4 inch is probably enough for 11 by 17. This is a pretty small sheet of paper. I don't want to spend a lot of real estate on this title block because 11 by 17 is a small sheet of paper. I want to maximize the area where I can do my drawing and show my viewport. So I'm not going to go crazy with this. By the way, that sketch can be brought in and backgrounded if I need to refer to it on the XREF, external references palette. You can see right now it's only referring to drawing 1. That's the drawing that I have open, my current drawing. I'm going to hit attach drawing, but instead of drawing on the flyout, I'm going to attach an image. I think I put it in downloads, and there it is. And now I'll see that this is just, I'll take the default scale I'm going to specify on screen. I'm just going to eyeball it. Insertion point, I'm going to specify on screen. I'm just going to say OK. And it puts it on my cursor. I'm selecting the insertion point. I'm just going to drag to give it scale. And you see you get the file placed, or as we call it, XREF, external referenced. And now it shows up on the list as well. This is probably a little premature because I don't know how big things are and I don't know where I am. This little symbol in the lower left-hand corner is called the UCS, the User Coordinate System. And when you see the little square where the X and Y axes come together, you're in WCS, World Coordinate System. Everything I draw in AutoCAD has coordinates. I didn't specify them, but if I look at the properties once it's selected, I can see that my vertex, the X and Y values of the first vertex of that rectangle are there, and so on. I can check all 4 vertices. You see how my selection is allowing me to do that. I can see that the width, well, actually it doesn't tell me that. Unlike Illustrator, it doesn't tell me width and height. It gives me the area though. And I guess the length, that's actually the perimeter. That's not the length of any side. That's the length of the perimeter. You'll find working in the type of documents that we do that those are more useful metrics than width and height. Okay, so let's say I wanted to make this exactly 11 by 17. How would I do that? A couple of ways I could do it. I'm going to select that and erase it. One thing I could do is draw a line. And I'm going to hit F8 to go into ortho mode so I can draw perfectly horizontally. Return, and I can draw another line from that first endpoint. I'm just hitting L enter to draw lines. You can find the tooltip also. And I have my object snap set up for endpoint, midpoint, and a few others. So I know that's going to snap to that endpoint. We always snap to objects in AutoCAD. We never just eyeball it. If I didn't have my object snap set up and I just wanted to do a quick snap, I can shift right mouse button and it brings up my running object snap, or maybe this is my temporary object snap, I forget. And I can say endpoint and it's there. So if I have this corner, I could use offset commands now to get the 11 by 17. I can offset the vertical 17. I can offset the horizontal 11. And that's my actual 11 by 17 rectangle in here. And then I could go in there and if I wanted to trim this up, I could use the fillet command with a radius of 0. And I would select the lines and it trims it up nice and neat. That's one way you could do it, and it's a way that's easy to understand. A better way to do it is using something called relative coordinates. How this works is AutoCAD knows everything I draw has coordinates. If I just pick the first point of that rectangle, I can use relative coordinates to tell AutoCAD where to put the opposite diagonal corner. And to invoke relative coordinates, you type in the ampersand for at. It's always XY values in AutoCAD. So that would be at 17, 11. Did you get that? It's relative 17 units to the right, that's positive, and 11 units up, that's positive 2. So that tells me, and if I hit enter, now I've drawn an 11 by 17 rectangle much quicker. Notice though that my vertices are, my first vertex of that rectangle has an X value of 2.5105, vertex Y of 2.6259. It's sloppy drawing. I'm going to select and enter, erase that. Aside from, or in addition to absolute coordinates, I'm going to use, relative coordinates with the ampersand. I'm going to use absolute coordinates in this case. Same command, rectangle, but in this case, when it's asking me for the first point, I'm going to type in 0, 0, enter. Notice that puts that right on the origin point of my UCS symbol. And then I don't need an ampersand. Since I started at 0, 0, I can type in absolute coordinates 17, 11. And now I have a title block. I know exactly how big it is. I know exactly where it is in space. It's right where I want it. This is called a title block. That's the terminology for it, but I'm also going to turn it into a CAD block. And you should know a little something about CAD blocks already. And with the CAD block, 0, 0 is an important point. And remember I said never draw on layer 0? Well, what have I just been doing? I've been drawing on layer 0. I'm going to go ahead and make a few new layers. I'm going to call this TXT prefix for text, dash TB for title block, dash lines. I'm going to call this one TXT for text, TB for title block, and text. And so there's going to be 3 layers involved in this title block: TXT for text, TB for title block, and logo for when I bring my UIC logo in there. Right now, the current layer is TXT title block lines. I'm just going to give that a different color value. I'm going to give all these a different color value so I can make sure the color when you're drawing in model space is a way of helping you stay on knowing that things are on different layers as well as anything else. The logo doesn't much matter because that's going to come in. I'm going to bring a symbol in from another image of the UIC logo. Okay, so instead of having layer 1 current, I'm going to set my text TB lines to be the current layer. And I don't need to draw it again. I'm just going to select this entity, look at its properties, and put this on the right layer. And because it is color by layer and line type and everything that can be by layer, it changes color when I change its layer definition. Okay, but this is actually 11 by 17. I don't actually want to see that rectangle that's 11 by 17. I want to have an offset to this dark line here. So I need to offset this 0.25. The offset command, that's something you're going to use a lot. I'm going to type in the value 0.25 and select, and notice you can decide which way you want to offset it. I'm going to offset that in. This outer rectangle, that's my page size. I don't ever really want this to plot. If you watched my config video, I'm not sure if I talked about non-plotting layers, but it's easy enough to understand. One that you're going to have in your drawing is called a viewport, and that's for a viewport. I can put miscellaneous things on here that I don't want to plot. I can do it that way, or I can have a separate layer, text, title block, no print. I could do it that way too. I'm going to do 2 things. First, make this a non-plotting layer by selecting the NoPlot icon. And then to reinforce that this is a NoPlot layer, I'm going to make this a color that isn't typically a color that I draw with. We're going to draw, once I get around to explaining the plotter config file, with the primary colors of Windows. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to be black line skinny to fat. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Black line skinny to fat. 6, 7, 8. Grayscale line skinny to fat. And then a couple of extra ones. 9 super skinny. And 11 skinniest of all. And I'll formalize that later, but I just want you to see that's why I'm selecting these first 4 plotting colors to use. So back in the old days of pen plotters, this we see it as red on the screen, but AutoCAD recognizes this is pen number 1. And when you would plot an AutoCAD drawing and you would plot the DWG, you wouldn't use PDFs back then. The pen plotter had a carousel with literally physical pens that would spin, and it would grab the right pen width and would respond to number 1 in the carousel and go grab that pen and draw all the red lines. Go grab pen 2 and draw all the yellow lines. So you also had to make sure you loaded the pens correctly in the pen plotter. It's a little bit of history for you. And if you were in a hurry and had a complex drawing, one of the pens would run out halfway through. And then you would have to start over because you would never be able to get 2 plots to align on themselves. Never, ever, not in a million years. So I've got a special no print layer. I'm going to make that this purple, which is not a color I would typically draw with. So that'll help me to recognize that it's a no print layer. And I meant to be text no print. Okay, and I also chose a dark layer so it fades into the background. I want to see my lines clearly, and I want to see things that don't print. I don't need them to be bold because they don't print. Okay, so that was my main rectangle. Now I need an offset in here. How big? I don't know. Maybe I'll try an inch. How will I get a 1-inch line parallel to this? Well, I could do it a couple of ways. I can offset a value of 1, and I can take this polyline. I could explode that and erase what I don't need, and then use the extend command to extend that line to the border. That's one way of doing it. Another thing I could do, I'm just erasing that, is maybe draw a line up 1 inch. I've given it direction. Now I'm just going to type in at the keypad 1 enter, and that drew that line I still have ortho on, in the direction 1 unit. And now I know how much this is. I can just type in 16.5. How is it 16.5? Because it's 17 and I've taken a 1/4 inch from either side. So I could do it that way as well. Another thing I could do when I was at this point would be snap perpendicular to this line. And when I'm going perpendicular, I can touch this line anywhere on the line. I don't need to be near the point where it's perpendicular. Anywhere on that line, if I'm snapping perpendicular, it'll know where to put it. I used a window to select that line that I don't need. That was just to get me to this location. A couple of other ways you could do it too. I think those are the most simple geometric ways to get what I wanted. Sometimes the more sophisticated ways of locating points are not necessarily faster, especially if you don't do it a lot. All right, so I've got my basic outline here. I need this to be, let's say, 3 equal sections. I don't know that I want it to be 3 equal sections, but let's say I did. Here's a command that might not be covered yet because it's a little more advanced. It's called divide. I'm just going to type it in at the command line, divide. I got to tell you, one of the things I love about CAD is you can type in commands at the command line. It's so nice. The interface, the GUI, has changed so many times since 1990 when I started using AutoCAD, and it can happen to you too. So it is nice that all the commands since 1990 have been the same on the command line. You can just type it in. Experienced users tend to use more keyboard input, both in AutoCAD and Creative Cloud applications. New users like the icons because they can see it, but once you know the commands, it's much faster to go left hand on the keyboard, right hand on the mouse, and you can blast through this a lot more quickly. So I typed in the divide command. Notice my command line gives me the status of where I'm at. It's saying select object to divide. I'm going to select that line. It says the number of segments. I want 3, so I just typed in 3, enter. Did anything happen? Well, it did. It placed points there in thirds. And, 16.5 divided by 3, that's a fractional number there. I can't do that in my head. Maybe I could, but probably not. It's almost easier to do 17 divided by 3. So there are points there. The command worked. Um, trust that the commands work, and if you don't see the results, something else is typically causing the problem. You can display points in AutoCAD any number of ways. There's a path to get to the point display, but I'll tell you the command. It's DD for dynamic dialog P type. DD type, and that describes what point style you're going to see. So right now it's on a literal point, and as you know, a point has no dimension, so it's not showing up as anything. I'm going to give it something that has some dimension just so we can see them, so we know we're not going crazy. We can express this as a percentage relative to the screen, which means as we zoom in or out, it's going to change size, or in absolute units. I'm going to end up erasing these, so I don't much care. So now we can see those are the points that I set. Now I can draw a line, L enter, and I don't have point snapped. I don't have a point snap as one of my object snap settings. So I'm going to shift right click, and shift right click works if you set up the right click customization the way I did in my config video, right? When you're going from a point, I believe you're actually going from a node. So from node perpendicular to there. Return, same command, just spacebar. From node perpendicular to there. Now I can just select those 2 points and erase. Now I've got perfect thirds. Divide's a very useful command. I use it for all kinds of things. It's deceptively simple. I can use divide to set up a parking lot pretty quickly. Paint striping. You could do lots of things with divide. You'll find it's not just for simple things like this. Also, it's related command measure. So divide, I tell it how many sections I want. The measure command, even more useful. I define the length of the segments, and it places a point at that prescribed length. That's actually the command I use to set up parking lots, which I know it's your dream to set up parking lots. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. I'm well underway. I'm going to make my my text layer current, title block text. And what did I say? I wanted something for notes here. There's 2 ways of doing text in AutoCAD. I'm going to go to the Annotate tab, and I'm going to use multiline text. It's sort of akin to paragraph versus point text in Illustrator. And in this one, you click a point and drag the rectangle and click that other point, and it's giving you a word processor. So I don't know what my note is going to be. I'm going to just type in the first part of it. If I have serious notes, I'll probably use more space. But I know one thing, I hate this default font. I'm going to do a Control A for select all and see what typefaces are available to me. And it should be everything that I have in my computer. And just go to a basic sans font. We'll use an Arial. And how big should it be? Control A again. Right now it's 0.2 of an inch. That's big for text on a letter size page. For notes, this is fine print, something more along the lines of 0.08 of an inch. That's a little more like it. And we could even say notes. You can also adjust the size without double clicking and going into the word processor. If you just select this text, notice that it shows you some things like its justification is top left, its rotation, that's in real world units, tells me its layer, its color, of course, is by layer, and so on. It tells me a lot of things about it. Rather than starting the text command again, I'm going to select that and just go to copy. And maybe you can see I'm already centering this up because I plan on centering my title in here. I'm going to double click on it, do a Control A, and type in the word title. And this is going to be a placeholder for my title. Do a Control A. Again, make sure this is center justified. When I click off it, I can see that it's actually, the text is center justified within there, but the block of text itself is top left justified. I'm going to want that to be top center justified. Now I can grab this by its insertion point, and if I hover over the midpoint of the line, it'll put it right there. It's also quite small for a title. Title, let's say 0.15. All this stuff might be adjusted later, but it's a good place to start. You don't need to have huge text on a 11 by 17. This is something people hold in their hand. So just enough to get the job done. What else do I have on here? Oh, a date. I'm going to copy this again. And I'm going to take off ortho because I want this like in my lower right-hand corner of this sub block here. I also want it to be bottom right justified. This means that when I go in there and change it, it'll hold that point. I'm going to double click in there, select it, make sure this is right justified. Let's say I go from May to December. I don't want it going over this line. I want it to hold that right justification and move to the left. I'm going to make sure I know this is a date. Change this. It's about the same, maybe a little bigger than my notes. I'll make this 0.1. So when I go in and change this date, what's the date? June 29th. See how it holds that right corner? That's the behavior that I want here. Likewise, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy this from this endpoint to this endpoint. That's nice because it gives me the same margin, and it's starting to look orderly. And I said I wanted my name here. Control A for select all. Get all formal on you here. Oh, I'm Swedish. Okay, and the last thing I'm missing is the UIC logo. I get these off the internet, like you can too. I probably have a link for it somewhere. I'm just going to go to UIC Logo. And find it on here, download logos, got to do your UIC login. What? You got to be kidding me. All right, well, I know I have one somewhere. So let me see if I can find it. Okay, so yeah, I've got many logos scattered in many directories. I can go to the XREF and go ahead and bring this in again, or you can actually just drag and drop and get the same effect. So I'm going to go ahead and the defaults, it asked me, let me escape, do it again. You'll recall that when I did the XREF command, the options were to ask for scale and rotation and stuff. So this is, I'm guessing, remembering the same settings as when I used the XREF command. So I'm just going to eyeball this, something like that. Now it's asking me for rotation. Keep an eye on your command line because there's a lot of good stuff going on there. 0 is the rotation I want. And there it is. I'm going to select it and move this. And somewhere around there. And all this white space, my gosh, I don't care for that, but what are you going to do? Make it a little smaller, center it up a little bit, and I'm going to select it. And notice it's on top of my name. It's going to print like that. If I go to print this, and I'm going to go to a PDF, I'm going to print a window, and it's going to ask me what window. So I'm going to select endpoint to endpoint, and my size is going to be tabloid. It's landscape. And let's do a preview and see what we get. And we get what we saw on the screen, including this overstrike. Plotting in AutoCAD is quite complicated. For right now, I'm going to just use one of their monochrome CTBs. CTB is a plotter control file. I've got one for UDVL that I'll release maybe this week or next, and that dictates how the colors plot. You can see that if we preview it now, it previews in monochrome, but for my picture, which is really red. So that's going to preview as red. That's a picture. You can see it's pixels. And also I've got this problem with the overstrike. Exit this, cancel out of that. I don't really want to print. There's a tool that controls draw order, but what I typically use is I'll select an object and invoke the command for draw order, which is DR, enter. And I'm typically bringing stuff to the front or back. In this case, I'm bringing it to the back, so I'll take the default. And if I go to print again, and let's see if it'll remember my previous plot, and it does, and I do a preview, I can see that it's no more overstrike. So this is a basic title block, not overly technical. We don't like planning docs to look overly technical. We like them to be sort of friendly and approachable. And so I'm not going to go crazy with revisions and all kinds of technical stuff. I do need a north arrow and a scale to make this complete. But for right now, I've got something that I can work with. I'm going to exit this, cancel that. How do we turn this into a block? If I type the block command, this is giving me the block definition dialog. Right now, I've got no blocks in this drawing at all. I'm going to make my first block, and I'm going to call this TB01 11 by 17. You're going to want the size in the name of the block. Base point, that's the point that it's going to insert and hold constant. It's sort of a no-brainer. In this case, 0, 0. I can type in 0, 0, or I can pick 0, 0. There's lots of ways of defining a point. You know 3 of them so far. You can pick a point, you can use absolute coordinates, or you can use relative coordinates. I think there's 7 ways of, I think I learned in a class I took years ago that there's 7 ways of defining a point in AutoCAD. So I selected the insertion point. Now it says select objects. What's going in my block? All this is going in my block. Forget about this for right now. I'm going to take the default on the rest of this. The block unit is in inches. Actually, when we set up drawings, we don't like units. Units sort of get in the way. It's hard to explain, but we understand our units to be feet in planning docs. But if we define them as feet, and I bring in an architectural drawing, well, they use inches as units, and everything is going to be 12 times too big. So if it's unitless, it's a little more agnostic in terms of how things fit together. But for right now, we'll just roll with this and see how it goes. I'm going to say OK, and nothing changed. Or did it? If I select on this anywhere, you can see that it's now all together. It's got one highlight, and that is at 0, 0. That's the insertion point. I can grab it from there and move it because it's all one thing now. I don't really want this in model space at all. I want my title block in paper space, or in what they call layout mode now. I'm going to go ahead and configure a layout at 11 by 17. And then bring in that block. Actually, I'm going to bring in that block first. If I look at my layer control, I see I've got four layers going on that contain that title block. But one thing I don't have is a layer for the title block itself. So I'm going to make a new layer and just call this TXT TB for title block. And that is going to be, the color won't matter because there's not anything drawn on this, but that's going to be the layer that my actual block is on. Right now it's on the text layer. So layers, use more, not fewer. I'm going to erase this, but it's still in my drawing because the block definition is still there. Anyway, let me insert my block now. I'm typing in the command insert. There's also a pull down somewhere. There's an insert pull down. We can bring your block in. It came up at the top of my list because that's the only block in this drawing. Now I'm going to deselect specify on screen. I know I want that at 0, 0, 0. Scale, I know I want it to be scale 1 and rotation 0. So I'm just going to say OK, and it brings it in at the correct size and place. Remember, 0, 0 is the edge of the paper. Okay, so my title block is fine. Is it? Let me check the size. DIST for distance. Let me just check endpoint to endpoint. Make sure I'm at 17, and I am. Belt and suspenders, let's check the height. It should be 11, and it is. So far, so good. But this white space is what's going to print. So I need to adjust this layout tab so that it's in sync with my title block. To do this, I'm going to right click on the layout tab and go to the page setup manager. Here's where I modify some settings about how this layout is going to plot. So I'm going to go to modify. The first thing I want to do, make sure it's going to an Adobe, make sure my paper size is right. That's going to be tabloid and landscape. I'm plotting the layout. My origin offset is 0, 0, no offset. And display plot styles. I'm going to plot in monochrome for the time being. I'm not seeing that on here though. I want to see that. Let's say OK and see what that does. And that's looking better. Here's my viewport. And this is how it's going to print. Well, there's something a little funny with this offset. This is not, if I do a line from 0, 0, I can see that my layout is building in an offset to this. And I'm not sure why. You can just barely see the dashed line here. That's what's going to actually print. So this has to either come down and left 1/4 of an inch is what it looks like, or I need to make an adjustment a different way, but the white area should be equal to what I want to plot. Let's see if I can, oh, and let me rename this too. I'm going to do a slow double click on this, actually a faster double click on this, Control A. I'm going to call this 11 by 17. So I'm just going to cheat this. It looks more like maybe 1/8 of an inch than 1/4. Negative 0.125x. Negative 0.125y. Let's see what this gets me. And this is good. This is centered. This dash line is what prints. You can see my title blocks inside of that. This viewport should be on the viewport layer. And I didn't make that yet. I need to do that. We put our viewports on their own layer. Call that layer viewport. Again, give it a color that you don't typically draw with, and make sure it's NoPlot. We don't want that stuff to plot. And now we'll give this viewport the layer definition of the viewport layer. And I'm eyeballing this. It's probably not the right way to go. I should have this to be a distinct size, like 1/4 of an inch from the title block. So I'm going to draw a quick rectangle. I'm going to offset that 1/4 of an inch. That's my viewport. I'm going to make sure it snaps to little things like this. I was close. I mean, my eye's pretty good on this, but no reason it shouldn't be perfect. The thing about this is you tend to do this once every, you know, 5 years. So I've got these spare lines. I want to make sure I erase those. I don't want stray lines running around. So there's my viewport. That's all that's there. Here's my title block. That's all that's there. And I'm pretty good to go. Make sure that's on my viewport layer. I'm going to double click in here and just zoom in on my sketch, just so I have something to, what layer was that on? 0. Do a quick printer preview. And it's looking like I want it to look. I'm not seeing any line weight. That's because everything's being drawn with a skinny black line, but here's the basics of it. Might make this a bold, Arial bold. That's a little more like what I want from a title, but simple, direct, good place to start, enough for where we're at right now. Okay, so that's the basic steps for putting together a title block. I can use this. I can go ahead and make, let's say I had 5 different views I wanted to show. I'm just copying this layout now, and I'll have this title block in all of them. Maybe in this one, I'm doing a detail. Maybe on this page, I'm zoomed way out, and maybe here, this is ridiculous, obviously, but I'm just showing you. This block is the same in all of them, and should I need to change it, I can just go to right-click and block editor, and I can. Are you kidding me? Hey, Freudian slip. And then when I'm done, close block editor and save the changes. And the cool thing about blocks, you see where this is going. This is going to be updated in every instance of this block. Blocks are really powerful. We use them for a lot more than just title blocks, obviously. And the next video, I'm going to draw a tree symbol, and that too is going to be a block. I think that's about all I want to tell you about this. It's a good start. Maybe I want to get into making some fatter lines or something bolder, but at least I've got something I can work with. It's important to have something that you can revise. If you've got nothing, you're in a bad place. So draw something, even if it's just the rectangle, and then you have something you can revise and a place to go from there. Okay, thanks for watching.